Thanks. I should say, first of all, that's not actually my job title. It's an amalgamation of two jobs. I'm a senior analyst for a company called ICT and climate change. I'm also researching at the University of Sussex. So session 2 was entitled Toward a Climate Neutral ICT Sector. I think we covered 3 broad areas. The latest thinking on methodologies for measuring carbon and energy efficiency at the level of equipment, services, the individual company and the sector. Secondly, we looked at some specific energy efficiency initiatives at service providers and also at equipment manufacturers. And thirdly, because it was quite broad, I think, this session. Thirdly, we looked at various perspectives on the role that policy and standardization could play in stimulating activity in the right direction. So just briefly, Dr. Chris Tuppen from BT proposed a new metric, as Tim said, designed to promote green growth for a low-carbon future. The carbon stabilization intensity model, I think we all found that quite interesting and probably want to spend a bit of time thinking about the implications of that if it was adopted more widely. So it's, as you probably remember, the ratio of GHG emissions to the unit contribution to GDP. So at the level of the company, that's talking about value add, essentially. And Dr. Tuppen calculated that we need a 9.6% reduction in CSI worldwide each year in the developed world in order to have a hope of reaching the IPCC targets for stabilization by 2050. And I think, you know, if there's anything that we keep in our minds, I guess, when we leave the conference, it's that curve and what might be involved in being able to achieve that. On the positive side, he also calculated that the ICT sector probably generates wealth 10 times more efficiently than the worldwide average. So I think that was certainly worth emphasizing. He also emphasized that an individual company could achieve a reduced CSI while also increasing its absolute emissions. And he pointed to the role of regulators there in ensuring adequate sources of renewable energy and to make sure we have the right incentives and not impediments to that. And then Jack Rowley from the GSM Association, he highlighted the contribution of the mobile industry to GDP relative to its contribution to global CO2 emissions, and his figure for that was 0.1%, which I think is interesting because that's half the percentage that Etsy quoted this morning, but using a similar chart. So I think that does highlight that clearly we do need some clear metrics on this subject. In GSM, they're also, or in the mobile industry, they're researching what to do about mobile remote base stations, particularly in developing countries, replacing diesel generators with wind and solar. And obviously that could be a very large market for the renewable industry. He also noted that more research is needed to understand the barriers to handset recycling, which is sort of a marginal issue for climate change. And then we heard from Paolo Bertoldi from the ECJRC, and he outlined EC energy policy. And I think it's very interesting, this sort of convergence. We used to think of telecom and media convergence. There's also a telecom and energy convergence going on, I think. He talked about energy policy. He also outlined the EC's action plan on energy efficiency. And he highlighted Energy Star as a success story, and he'd like to see this voluntary labeling system extended to data center equipment. He also talked about the emerging code of conduct for data centers and the other ICT codes covering power supplies, digital TV, and broadband. And as we know, it's not so easy to sign up to a code of conduct. And Mr. Bertoldi emphasized that the codes are designed to promote dialogue on solutions to the challenges of energy efficiency, but also to raise awareness and to promote the use of common metrics. From the manufacturing side, we heard from Paolo Gemma, who's from Etsy and also Huawei, about the latest energy efficiency thinking for network equipment. He highlighted the potential of the code of conduct on broadband equipment to make a difference to energy efficiency in the access network. However, as we know, he noted that currently it's difficult to sign up, and part of that is to do with a lack of improved chipset technologies. That's acting as something of a barrier right now. And then, in contrast perhaps with the European view, we heard from Doug Johnson from the Consumer Electronics Association in the US, and he presented the association's research into energy consumption in the US. And he found that, or they found that about 12% of US residential electricity is for consumer electronics, but that figure is likely to grow. So the standby power requirement is falling, but at the same time the number of devices, and I think critically the usage time for these devices, both of these are increasing. The CEA's view is that the sector should support voluntary market-driven programs, and again Energy Star being an exemplar of that. And then lastly, Martin Oyster of the Swiss Federal Labs talked in some detail about the findings of a life cycle analysis study of desktop PCs, a particular manufacturer's PCs from China. And the finding was a 3-to-1 ratio of production to in-use energy consumption. And there was, as I recall, a lot of interest from the audience about life cycle analysis, and I think we've heard quite a few questions throughout the event about that. And to me, that seems to suggest that the energy is very engaged with understanding the direct impacts of its products and services. So I think overall, in this session, we had a strong emphasis on technical solutions and an eagerness to seize perhaps some of the low-hanging fruit in that way. At the same time, I think it was an indication we need more insight into the net impacts of some of these initiatives. In terms of what happens in the social context that these technologies are used. And just a last comment, I opened the session questioning whether should the sector be putting so much energy into the 2% problem as opposed to the 98% problem. I think we had three justifications for that from the presenters. Firstly, that the footprint is significant and it is growing. Secondly, that important knowledge and experience can be accumulated and used to present the case to customers. And that thirdly, being able to demonstrate that the sector can take control of its footprint is very valuable for establishing the sector's credibility, not only with customers but also with regulators. Okay, so I think that's it.